Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. Really, this is a great one. I first heard about vehicle to grid like 8, 9 years ago, 10 years ago. And as soon as you hear about it, you go, what does that mean? That means that when you're not driving your vehicle, your electric vehicle, you can use it to do something else. The battery in it is just electric vehicle is a battery on wheels with a big computer. That's all it is. And it does steering, lights, and windscreen wipers, and seats. Okay, it does quite a lot of other things, but basically it's a battery on wheels. And then you go, well, what about if it was a battery on wheels that's quite a big battery on quite big wheels, like not a car, not a delivery van, a bus? What if you could use the energy that was stored in a bus to help back up the grid, to help it with shave off the top of peak demand? Would that be useful? And the answer is yes, it would. And that's what we're talking about today. School buses in the United States of America that are already plugged in to bidirectional chargers. That means the electricity can go both ways, that can help manage a grid. Really interesting stuff. Before we get into that, just very briefly, let's talk about another form of technology that can help shift the load and help run the grid better. And if we all used technology like this, we would have a more efficient grid, and we'd use more power more efficiently, and we'd waste less power. And I'm talking about a wonderful company that are still the sponsors of the Fully Charged Show podcast and are an amazing company, My Energy. And I've been using their technology for many years now, ever since they started, and it's been a joyous experience. It's never gone wrong. Nothing's ever happened that's weird about it. It just looks after. So there's two bits of technology that I'm really aware really help me run my house. One is the Eddy, and all Eddy does is just a little box, and it's called EDDI Eddy, and it just manages the power that I produce in my house, on my house, the solar panels and the batteries and the hot water and the heating and the cooker and everything. And it just manages it. It means I don't have to do anything. Took a bit of time to set it up. Once it's set up, it just does stuff, and it's constantly doing stuff. That's Eddy. The other one is the Zappy Charger. Many of you will know about this, but for those of you who don't, just very briefly, it is a car charger, socket on the wall, just like any other car charger. And what it allows you to do, and also what it allows you to do so simply and so easily and remotely, is charge your car off the grid. Well, that's fine. That's what we all do. Or charge your car using the minimum amount of grid electricity and the maximum amount of solar electricity from your solar panels, for example. Or the third setting is it only uses the power from your solar panels. So once your battery's in your house, or your kettle's not boiling, or your fridge is already cool, any electricity that's excess that your solar panels are generating that would normally just go into the grid and disappear, all of that gets put into the car with varying amounts. So, we know what it's like. The sun comes out, it goes up. There's a cloud, it goes down. It will charge your car at incredibly low speed and incredibly high speed, depending on the sun. And the car manages to cope with that. And the Zappy Charger deals with that absolutely frictionlessly. You don't have to do anything clever. You plug it in. It just starts charging. If you want to change it to Eco Plus Plus, which is the setting that allows you to just take your solar, you just get beep, beep, two little bumps, two little bips. I don't even know what you call it, because in the olden days we had switches and knobs that you turn. Now you just got a thing, you beep, beep, beep. Anyway, it's really easy to use. An old fool like me can use it. myenergy.com, myenergi.com. Check them out. Have a look at what they're doing. They're always exhibiting at our shows, and I think I've mistakenly said they're going to be exhibiting at our San Diego show, which is probably on when you're listening to this. They're not there. I got that wrong. They're visiting, and they're visiting with us to be there. So there's representatives from My Energy will be attending the event, but they don't yet sell their amazing products in America, but clearly they're planning to do that. And they've got some amazing new things coming out very soon. Actually, it is now very soon. I've been talking about them for a while. That's enough. My Energy, we love you. Thank you so much for sponsoring this episode. And now let's get on with, let's go and meet someone who is the Director of Clean Transport at the San Diego Gas and Electric Company, SDGC. This is the people who supply electricity to San Diego. You're going to learn all about it from this amazing woman, Jeni Reynolds, who is kind of obviously running this project. This is the buses, electric school buses. So these are existing diesel-powered buses that have been converted. And this is one thing we didn't cover correctly. They've been converted to electric drive by a company called Lion Electric, who are based in Quebec in Canada. And that's who is doing this conversion. So they're taking out the diesel motor and all the exhaust stuff and the gearbox and all the heavy, dirty mechanics and the exhausts. Imagine all that. The diesel engines are not clean, no matter what you've been told. And they're replacing it with an electric drivetrain and batteries and a battery management system and everything. Drivers love them. The kids love them. And then when they're not being used, they're plugged in to bi-directional chargers at their base where they would be anyway. No one's having to change anything. They're being used in exactly the same way. It's just when they're not being used to ferry children from home to school or back or vice versa, they're helping the grid. What a brilliant thing. I'll shut up. Let's get on with it. Please welcome Jeni Reynolds, Director of Clean Transport at San Diego Gas and Electric. So, Jeni, thank you so much for finding time to talk to us today. And I just got to say two things. One is, on the second day that I was ever in the United States, I was staying with friends in New York State, upstate New York. I'd never been to America before, and I had to get up early because her young children had to get on the school bus, which meant nothing to me. And a yellow bus pulled up outside the house, and they got on the yellow bus. I saw it for real. So it was a very early experience of mine in the United States, was the school bus. We'll get to that in a minute, but can you just give a brief description of, for people outside the USA, about San Diego Gas and Electric? Because it might be a slightly different system that we all work under in different countries around the world. A lot of people live all over the world that listen to this. So just a quick description of the history and what you do and where you cover, the area you cover with the company.
Sure, absolutely. In fact, whether you're outside of California or outside the United States, all the utilities in our country are very different. So that's a really important question to ask. What is San Diego Gas and Electric, and who do we serve? So my name is Jeni Reynolds. I'm the Director of Clean Transportation. I work for San Diego Gas and Electric. We are a investor-owned utility, which is different than a non-investor-owned utility. So I think that's the first difference that you might see in California. The second thing, we are also geographically really located. If you think about San Diego, you think about the Mexican border of the United States, the Pacific coast, that kind of first little bit is what we own. And so we actually are the smallest utility in the state of California. We're mighty in spirit, although maybe small in size. So for your listeners who have not been to California, San Diego is a wonderful area. And San Diego Gas Electric provides both electric and gas services, which is very different than some of our other sister utilities that might provide just electric or just gas.
And so you're kind of effectively a city energy. You supply the city, as opposed to, like, if you live 50 miles outside San Diego, you wouldn't get your electricity and gas from you, I guess. Is that right?
So it's San Diego County up to the south part of Orange County. But yes, one of our largest energy consumers are the residents of the city of San Diego. But we have big cities like Chula Vista and Oceanside and parts of Orange County. So we are more than just San Diego, despite the name.
Yes. Oh, that's great. And then your history as well. I couldn't help being intrigued by that. So, I mean, you've obviously studied a lot, but you were actually in the military for some time, which is kind of unusual jump in my mind. I mean, not a lot of the people I've spoken to who work in the energy industry have been in the military as well. So it's quite an intriguing journey you've been on.
No, I'm a trained research psychologist by training. And so my background and how I ended here are very divergent. I'm sure that's another podcast on translatable skill sets, right? But yeah, I had my time in the military. I had my time in nonprofit and small businesses. And so being here at San Diego Gas and Electric as a kind of a large organization serving just a variety of different types of customers, I think that just really helps me have a better customer perspective. So
Yeah.
it's helped me, I will say.
Good. No, I mean, because the people who are listening to this who know nothing about why we're talking to you or what San Diego Gas and Electric have done are going to be intrigued. Well, didn't he talk about school buses? Now they're talking about, but there is a connection.
There is a connection.
And when I first heard about, I think I first heard about this scheme, the idea of what you're doing, quite some time ago, maybe a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and immediately I heard it, I understood from my very brief interaction with American school buses. Oh, I get it. Because so my children used to catch the bus to school many years ago, and it was a bus that the rest of the time was used to take tourists around the thing, or it was taking people up to an exhibition. It wasn't exclusively designed for doing school runs. It was just like a bus. And but this American school buses, can you explain that they have a very specific role, because are they owned by the federal government? Am I right in thinking that?
So that's a great question. So let me zoom out for a little bit and just talk about school buses in general.
Yeah.
So I'm not an expert in all school districts, but what I can tell you is, if I give a broad stroke, when you think about the United States and the role that school buses have played, they played a very important role, from making sure that children that are in rural communities can get to the closest public school. Oftentimes, they're also a way to get students that are in different regions to different schools, to make sure that there's diversity of thought and mind in all of our school districts. And they're a free service. Now, I'm not here to say that they're free across the United States. I'm sure there's some pocket that somebody will come up and be like, in this city, we have to pay for it. So, but for the most part, this is a freer type service, and it's not run by the federal government. So our school districts will be the ones that fund the school buses. So that's where regionally in the United States, it can get very different depending on how, to be honest, rich or poor your school district might be. Your access to that free transportation will be different. That said, nationwide, school buses are not an anomaly. So when you said I'm not surprised you're one time in the United States you saw a school bus. It's a very iconic sort of understanding of kids and schools, and they just make a great synergy when we think about battery storage and the fact that they're everywhere, the fact that they provide great services, but the fact that they're idle 95. So it's a big battery that serves a great community and then sits there. And what are all the great resources that we can do with that? So I hope that helps your listeners understand a little bit. But again, regionally based, there's a lot of differences between school district to school district.
But I mean, I think the critically important thing is there are an enormous amount of them in the United States spread over the whole country.
Yes,
and as you say, I don't know what the percentage is, but certainly in the 90%, they're doing nothing. They're just sitting in a parking lot.
I think the statistic that we really quite is like 90. They sit idle 95% of the time, and so obviously that probably differs a little bit. But they sit for a while, right? They pick students up in the morning and they pick them up in the afternoon, and other than that, maybe some districts have their school buses do other types of things. But I know I live in Santee, and our school district bus station is actually just right next door to me. I see it every day, and I see them just sitting there every single day. So I can imagine that's pretty common for most.
Yes. So that's where the whole, I think a huge number of people, just general people who aren't interested in electric transportation or the energy transition, haven't considered other roles that vehicles could play in our lives if they're not running on gasoline or diesel.
No, I think that's fair.
That's a really important thing, isn't it?
I think that's fair. I want to, when you think about EVs, I think most people think about transportation, and that's totally appropriate. But all EVs are batteries on wheels. And so when you think about, are you more likely to put a battery on the side of your house? Are you more likely to buy an electric vehicle to travel? What we're finding is that customers are more likely to buy an EV than they are to put a battery on their house. Now, once they get that EV, the capacity of that battery is what's really exciting. And in school districts, it's the same thing. Not only, fuel costs, because gas in America, and we won't even go, again, that's another podcast, but gas in America is fairly expensive. And then when you think about operational costs of electrons, that's cheaper. But then when you add to it the capacity for it to do that energy exchange with the grid, it's limitless. And I think that in our clean fuel transition in the States, being able to get the right capacity of battery storage, whether it's stationary or mobile, is really, really important.
Yeah. So the intriguing thing is then, I guess it's going to, everything is going to vary, but I just wondered what the average mileage is for the buses that you run. I mean, I guess there isn't going to be an average, but I'm guessing it's not thousands of miles. It might be 100.
Yeah,
I don't even know.
I wish I had. Yeah, I wish I had that answer for you. So I don't know the average. What I can say, at least for El Cajon Valley, where we're doing our vehicle to grid school bus pilot, a typical bus battery is about 60 kW. And so
Right.
if you want to put that in context, that basically can power a home, a typical San Diego
Yeah.
home, for about half a month.
Yes.
So it's pretty big, right? If you can power half a home on one battery, it's a pretty good size. And I don't want to get into demand and the fact that that's also a really large quantity of energy available at one time. But these are not small batteries. I think they're about 5, 6 times larger than a typical vehicle, and their operational cycle is just ideal. So I don't know uniformly what the mileage is. What I do know is the usage and the pattern of most school buses allow them to charge and discharge really in accordance with our kind of peak load, which makes them a really great candidate for some of these new innovative pilots.
Yes. Because I mean, this is the thing. I think the big difference between people who live in the sort of the slightly more northern climes, like the United Kingdom or certainly large parts of Europe, it's when I travel and I go, oh, I get now why people want solar panels on their roof of their house, because
Yeah.
it's sunny at peak demand. So I'm married to an Australian, so I've spent a lot of time there. And solar
Yeah.
and air conditioning really just walk hand in hand. I mean, they are perfectly aligned, because the
Yes.
time you want air conditioning is where it's really hot in the middle of the day. You don't need it so much in the night. But that aspect of it, and I've spent quite a lot of time in California over the last few years. I'm very aware of that. But the idea that you can shift the load, I mean, that's really what you're doing in a way, or shift the load to fit the demand. So presumably you can charge them during the day when they're not in use. They do their run in the afternoon to pick up the children and take them home, and then they're sitting idle again. Well, can you then discharge them at that point, or is it not a strict pattern? Does it vary in the day?
No, so I think what you're saying is right for all batteries, whether it's a school bus battery or a stationary battery. What we will say with school buses is that they happen to be stationary in California, and this isn't true maybe for the rest. So our peak
Yeah,
load, to your shifting load, 100% right. And when you say shifting load, it's being able to absorb renewable energy in the middle of the day and then shift it to 4 to 9, which is in California and San Diego, my region, is where our peak. And at 4 to 9, there's actually not a lot of sun out there. So not only are we shifting renewable energy, but we're also helping to bring down that peak load. So
yeah,
when it's 4 to 9, we can shift that discharge. And that allows us, honestly, from a renewability standpoint, to use more renewables, but also from a cost perspective. Every time a utility doesn't have to turn on a peaker plant, which is what we need sometimes when energy demand gets high, that saves us a lot of money too. So it's renewable, but it's also, I think, a supply side cost savings that I don't think we talk about as often, but is also really important.
yeah. And it's kind. I mean, in some ways, it's good that the complexity of that is hidden from the general public. If you're living in your house and you switch something on in your kitchen, you don't really need to know the depth of complexity that's gone into supply that electricity. You just want it to work. And I mean, if a company like yours can shift that load and make it cheaper and more sustainable, that is a fantastic thing to do. I mean, that is what we're screaming for in the United Kingdom at the moment with against the odds. We're going through a difficult patch. I don't want to talk about it. It is very painful. But then, so because that's one of the when I occasionally have conversations with people who don't live in California, there is a
Yeah.
certain amount of sort of, oh well, of course in California they'll say they do this and they use renewables and they've got electric vehicles, which is a bit like it's a microcosm. My own experience is a microcosm of that with my neighbours. Oh, it's all right for you with your electric cars and your solar panels and your batteries.
Sure.
But I mean, it is, I think, extraordinary that California is so far ahead. I mean, I actually really have always said electric cars started this generation of electric cars and electric vehicles started in California. It didn't start in Detroit. It didn't start in New York or Washington, D.C. It came out of the computer industry in California 20 years ago. And when I worked in California a lot, that's when I became aware of this change. And it seems to be every now and then there'll be a new story. This is a great example where the next step is achieved in California earlier. Other people have talked about vehicle to grid for years, but you're actually doing it now, which I find really impressive.
Well, and I do want to give a nod to our partners overseas, because I mean, California, when it compared to United States, is definitely ahead, but we're also trailing from a global standpoint. There are a lot of countries that are a lot farther ahead. I will say, though, under the leadership of our Governor Newsom, he really, when he made that decree that we're going to ban the sale of new gas-powered cars in California by 2035. I mean, the car manufacturers in our country listened. And I think that's the power that California has from a country standpoint, right? When we move, commodity and commerce listens, right?
Yeah.
But I also want to give a nod to the fact that there's a lot of smaller states that don't get the same play that California does. Like Connecticut's a good example. They're really forward thinking too. They're smaller, and so they don't get kind of the same visibility. But I do see throughout every state a growing understanding of the need for electric vehicles to be part of the solution. And obviously under the Biden administration and the money that they're sending to different states, obviously this is the first time from a federal standpoint that we feel equally supported. So I think I'm used to California feeling like a little bit of a solo entity. But as I look to my left and my right, I'm seeing more states and obviously our federal government onboarding it. And that's what's going to take the whole transition. Because electric vehicles, when you think about how we fuel them, whether I go from California to Nevada to New York, I need infrastructure all the way. I'm just not going to travel up and down California. So until this is tackled from a nationwide standpoint, really, we're going to be in trouble. And I really appreciate the current administration's focus on that.
Yeah. No, we've recently spoken to people at Electrify America about the charging infrastructure and the network that's being built out, which is amazing. I mean, that's definitely happened. You know, a lot of that's happened since I was last in California, which is a few years ago now. But then, so just to make clear, the buses that you're using, the school buses, were built as diesel powered buses, I'm guessing. So they've been converted.
That's right. So Lime Electric converted, or retrofitted is what we say, converted our gas buses to electric. And that was a big deal. I will say that as we think about vehicle to grid, and I don't know if this helps your listeners a little bit, because people get a little bit confused with vehicle to home, vehicle to building, vehicle to grid. And so when we say vehicle to grid as a utility provider, we need something very specific. So like you talked about solar. Solar has an interconnection agreement with the utility, which means as the sun comes in, they can exchange it back to the grid. That's an interconnection. Basically, it's a handwritten agreement, a handshake to tell the utility that, hey, we're going to play nice and be safe.
Yeah.
That's no different than vehicle to grid buses. It's basically an interconnection agreement that you have to make with your utility, a handshake to say, hey, we're going to make sure that this exchange of electrons is safe, which is very different than a lot of what you're hearing in the States about vehicle to home, which you don't need your utility provider to help you with. You can be behind what we call behind the meter and just take care of your house without the utility getting involved. But when we talk about the grid, now we're talking about not just home benefit, but we're talking about global state, kind of that bigger, broader kumbaya, customer base. That is where I think as a utility, we find a lot of hope in the resiliency and the redundancy and sort of that future. Because playing with us, I mean, I think in our net to zero study, we said we need about 1,600 megawatts of storage by 2045. We didn't say whether that has to be vehicle to grid, that could be a vehicle but we just need it. So people, and I know you mentioned a little bit earlier about how people just want to turn on the lights, and I agree, but as residents, we also are going to have to think about the fact that we produce energy, we consume energy, and we're a market player, kind of like you sell stocks on the stock market in the US. It might not be much different in the future when you have battery storage. You can absorb when the energy is plentiful and cheap and help our grid by discharging. And these school buses are a great pilot because, again, operationally and the size of the battery just makes a lot of sense.
Because I mean, it was certainly one of the concerns I remember hearing a few years ago, because I actually saw an office in Tokyo probably 7 or 8 years ago, which was it was a Nissan project. And they were, I think, 8 or 9 Nissan Leafs plugged into vehicle to building a grid exchange system. So the whole office ran off the employees' cars, and all they did was guarantee that they could get home at the end of the day. So they said, we're taking over your battery, but you will be able to get home at the end of the day. And that was quite a long time ago. And I remember then discussions amongst often journalists or pundits rather than actual engineers. Oh, it's going to wear the battery down. It's going to just, you'll throw the battery away. It's cycling the battery. And I'm wondering if there's been discussions about that with the batteries that are in the buses. I mean, from more recently, I've heard it doesn't harm the batteries, and it doesn't. It's you know.
No, and I think we're in the same spot. I hear the same thing. So as a utility provider, this is what the pilot's all about. It's about learning.
Yeah.
We're going to learn about rate design. We're going to learn about customer behavior. We're also going to learn about technology. You're right. How does that impact the battery? There are a lot of different opinions out there. I'm not an engineer, but my engineering friends would appreciate that. I do remember when they say that the discharging and the recharging of batteries in concept wears it down. So it's not a bad question. It's the right question to ask. And I think that's why pilots like what we're doing will really help understand that value proposition. Is it worth it? Yeah. Does the exchange of back and forth make up for the benefit to the grid? And also as a utility, how do we make customers whole with that? They're providing us a service. How do we compensate them for that service? Yeah. We have a right now in front of our commission. So we're regulated by a commission. We have in front of them an export rate, which we're trying to get approved that would allow business customers like the school district to not have to sign up for a program, but have an ability to get compensated for that sort of benefit that they're giving us in a very unique way, because today it doesn't exist. So we're learning lots of stuff with this pilot. How do we incentivize customers? How do customers respond? And then how does our technology respond? So it's a fair question, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time before we really have the answer on that.
Yeah. Because I mean, yes, I think you're right. And the most recent people I've spoken to who are battery chemists, who are like properly clever, are saying it's not. They said if you accelerate a bus or a car hard, the strain on that battery is enormous. And when it's exchanging power, in a vehicle to grid system, it's like it's not moving. It's like it's almost going downhill. It's the strain is much less, and so they've argued that it isn't such a big thing. But the other one I'm intrigued at is, and this actually happened to me this morning. We had a delivery here, an Amazon delivery. Other services are available, and the guy was in an electric van, and because I was out in the garden anyway, I said, "Oh, do you like your electric van?" And I wish I hadn't asked. Because he was there for a long time telling me how brilliant it was. He loves it. But it's an aspect, I would imagine, that a school bus driver in the United States, it's a very specific and very responsible job. Have the drivers responded positively to the fact that they now have electric buses?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the school bus in El Cajon had to get sort of approved from the state and from the school district to run appropriately. And again, I'm kind of butchering probably the professional terms. So basically, it had to get re-sanctioned to be able to carry kids, right? Safety is very important. Yeah. We want to make sure that as a school bus, it has all. And the interview, and I don't want to paraphrase for him, but the interview with the bus driver was exactly that. This is just a very enjoyable ride. Some of it's because of the regenerative braking. Some of it's probably because of the noise. But I think a lot of it is that technology piece, right? You're driving something that's a little bit smarter than it used to be, and it's giving you data. And as a consumer, data lets you make better decisions. So I don't want to speak for all those school bus drivers in the world, but I will say at least some of the school bus drivers that were part of our pilot really enjoy driving electric. And as an electric car driver myself, when I made the switch, it was really the regenerative braking that I really liked. It was his ability to sort of moderate your pace and your speed while creating fuel for your car. It just made it really fun, not to talk about all the bells and whistles and screens and neat things that are coming out these days. So I would agree with you. It's something that we hear a lot.
Yes, because I had not even considered that aspect of it, actually, that the regen is a regen braking, which I'm very used to in a car. And I mean, I did a little experiment a couple of days ago in an electric car where I was going as far as I could without touching the brake. And
Ah,
eventually I was in an urban area. Eventually a cyclist wobbled in front of me and I had to actually touch. But I
safety
honestly,
first.
I'd probably driven 100 miles without touching the brake. Very safe. That
Absolutely.
wasn't put, and yeah, no, it's amazing that and it becomes a sort of game that you do with yourself going, don't, slow down now, slow down. All that stuff.
That's right. That's right.
But I'd never sort of imagined that on a bus as well, on a school bus. But it must be very different because that was my other memory of that very first day when I was in New York State. It was quite a noisy bus. The one that the kids I knew got. The kids I helped get on the school bus that morning. I just heard from one of them. She is now 32, so it was a long
Ah,
time ago.
yeah. Well, and you bring up noise, but also think about the smell. I can't
Yeah,
help it when I think about my childhood and getting on a bus, it was that
yeah,
smell. It's that gasoline and the smog. And so as these school buses are going into all of these different communities,
yeah,
they're not spewing out sucked. I mean, we
yeah.
talk about GHG emissions, but a lot of a car emissions is actually just particle like
Particulates.
junk. It's like
Yeah,
dirt in the air
yeah,
that hurts our lungs. And so obviously GHG emissions, which we don't see and feel, but there's the smut, and
yeah.
electric buses take that away, allows them to go into their communities that they serve in a way that they haven't been able to
Yeah.
before. I look forward to kids of the future. I don't know what they're going to say about electric school buses, but they're not going to say they're loud and smelly, right? It's
Yes.
going to be something else. I don't know what that's going to be, but I look
No.
forward to hearing what that is.
But I mean, presumably also that when they're all, I mean, I haven't actually ever experienced that, but presumably I've seen it in this country when all the buses arrive at the school to unload the children, then there's loads of buses there. Now, presumably traditionally they've just left their engines ticking over while the kids get off, which means
Yep.
they're pumping out that stuff right next to the school. I mean, that is, when you think of the knock-on effects, well, the kind of things that we're used to that are normal, that we think of
Yeah.
as normal, like a whole bunch of cars and buses outside of school with their engines running, is normal.
Yes.
You go, well, that shouldn't be normal. That's really bad.
Agreed.
We've
Yes.
all grown up accepting that, and it's that's the thing I find fascinating is the kind of, which you would have a much better grasp of, but in a sense, the psychology of the technology that we're seeing change. I mean, one of the arguments I've been making for the last few months is the resistance to electric vehicles now. I'm talking private electric vehicles is now entirely psychological. It's not technology. The technology has been
100%.
solved. It's financial and psychological. It's going, oh, I'm scared. Oh,
Mhm.
what happens if I run out? Have you ever said what happens if I run out when you're in a gas car? Because you should, because people run out all the time.
I so appreciate your statement, and I say that because you're 100% right. And I think we spend a lot of time in this conversation talking about the technology,
Yeah,
talking about the grid, but not the consumer, not the customer. And
yeah,
this is a personal decision. As a utility, I'm not selling a vehicle, right? I'm
yeah,
providing a fuel source if they choose to buy an electric vehicle. And whether it's range anxiety or now there's a real barrier in our country, at least there is a real barrier for entry for some of our low income areas. Just the cost of
sure.
EVs right now do make some customers who would like to be part of this transition, it's not affordable. And there are a lot of things that we're doing to help make sure nobody's left behind.
Yeah,
But other than that, I mean, the psychology of making that decision is 100% in your mind. Most people, when they tell me why they're not buying an EV, if I really spill it out for them, they have the capacity in a car nowadays to drive whatever they need to drive. They just
yeah,
don't feel safe because they have to fuel differently because it's changed. But think about, I wasn't alive back then, but I could imagine when we went from horse, buggy, and carriage to gas, that was probably a lot of anxiety, right? You went from
oh,
like knowing
huge.
how to fuel your horse to like having to carry gas in the back of your car.
Yeah,
And this is nothing more than another transition. And I think that we have a lot of good momentum and a lot of good information to help customers make that. But you're 100% right. The psychology of it is 100% what's going to
yeah.
uh, make this happen.
Yeah, because I mean, when you read I mean, it's very pertinent to the United States. When you read the sort of early history of the combustion automobile, you
Yeah,
bought gasoline at a chemist at a pharmacy
that's
in a
right.
can. There wasn't you couldn't stop. People got range anxiety. Seriously,
Yes, yes, serious range anxiety. You're right.
yeah, yeah. But the yes, it is. I think it's really exciting that you've made this step because because then there'll be someone who's maybe bought an electric car because let's go for the very worst reasons, because they're cool and they're virtue signaling or whatever the ridiculous terms are, and they've not considered for a moment that vehicle could have a use beyond being driven. And I think it's when people clock that, and one of the great ways of showing them is, well, our buses, when they're sitting still all day, are either charging or discharging into the grid and helping us balance the grid. That is such a great kind of commercial for that, in a way. That, I mean, is it quite widely known in San Diego that you're doing this? Has there been a lot of publicity around it?
Yeah, I would say so. This is the first vehicle to grid pilot that's operational in Southern California. And to be honest, it's been getting a lot of nationwide attention simply
Right.
because it's operational. It's hard to say who's first to the market, but this is definitely one that's up and operational. And the data, right? Because that's the best is yet to come. It's great that we got it operational, which was a heavy lift, and there were a lot of learning opportunities there. But the data that we're going to generate is where we're just going to share it. And at this point, it doesn't matter who gets there first, because we're
Yeah.
all going to get there, but we want to get there together and we want to learn from each other. So I would say that we have gotten a lot of attention simply because of the operational component to it. But there's a lot of other school districts, even in our region, that are looking to do this. And I've heard of other like-minded folks in states across the country that are really looking at school buses. Again, it's much easier to find a business operation that is already in the cycle that you need it to be than to go to another company and try to change their operational cycle.
Yeah.
So school buses are really a big deal here in the United States. A lot of money going to help schools, because that's another barrier. We talk about the psychology barrier. The financial barrier to this transition is bi-directional chargers are more expensive. Electric school bus retrofitting is more expensive. And so our government agencies are trying to reduce those barriers by giving our school districts rebates and incentives to make this transition. Because it is a, like I said before, from an equity standpoint, it's an expensive transition. It's not cheap.
Yeah, no. I mean, that is absolutely the case across the board with all this technology. The upfront costs are always the big barrier. But I mean, I'm assuming once you've got a whole fleet of electric buses and you can control when and how they're charged, and you've got control over that, I'm guessing the running costs are considerably reduced. If you're not buying diesel or and having to rely on that, you have some advantages once.
Yep, 100%. The operational cost of switching to an EV over the long run is you're going to save money, and that's why a lot of schools are trying to do it as quickly as possible. Is there's a natural cost savings with that once you get through the upfront cost, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, what? Because I don't actually know how many buses are currently in the scheme. How many buses are you using at the moment on this scheme?
For this pilot, we're using 8 buses. So we have 6 bi-directional chargers and 8 buses.
Right.
A pretty good litmus test. Again, it's a pilot, a pretty good way to kick the tire, so to speak, and see how this will all come to be. And then we have other school districts. San Diego Unified comes to mind that are looking for bi-directional chargers. So I think this is the first, but I said it's not going to be the last, and we're all going to learn from each other. So other states and I think across the country will join us in this, and we'll learn from each other.
And I'm assuming then, because you're in that specific area that you control, for you to share the data that you get is not commercially challenging. If you tell a power company on the other side of the country, this is what we've done, this is what we've discovered, it's not going to affect your bottom line. It's actually, I'm guessing it's a good thing that you can share that.
Yeah, so there's 2 things when it comes to data sharing. One that's really important in the state of California is customer privacy. So energy consumption and customer privacy is of the utmost importance in California and at SDG&E. So when we do pilots like this, there are often informal or formal agreements with the customer on the type of data that we can or can't share. Now we find with for-profit companies, they get a little bit more territorial over their data because of operational costs, right? Their secret sauce is a secret and they don't want to share it. I'm not to say that that's always the case, because there's a lot of for-profit companies that share data. With a school district, I think there's less resistance to that in terms of, their bottom line is their bottom line and they're not necessarily competing. But part of this pilot, being able to share data is a key component. And so I think that is where we're really fortunate with a partner like Cajon Valley. They're a very innovative school district that sees the value in doing this. And same with Nuvi, which is a company here in San Diego that's sort of the brains of the operation.
Right.
Having them allow us to take all of that technology and really understand how the data exchange, or not data, electronic exchange is going, is going to make this where we can learn from it for sure.
So that's, yes, I actually had a note about that. So, because I don't know the company, I'm learning about them now. But what they did they build the actual chargers, or are they running the backroom software? What is their role in the process?
Yeah, so there's some key players. So first we have the customer of record, and so that's Cajon Valley, and we've talked a lot about them.
Yeah,
they are the ones that are using the energy. Then we have Lion Electric, who are the manufacturers that sort of retrofitted the buses. So that allows these buses to now take on electricity instead of gas.
Right. And just quickly,
go ahead.
Just very quickly, are Lion Electric, are they based in California? I don't, because that's another company I'm not.
That's a good question. I'm not sure off the top of my head where they're headquartered out of. That's a good question.
I'll find out. Don't worry.
No, it's okay. It's a good question. Nuvi, with Nuvi, I know that they are actually a San Diego-based company. We work with them a lot. They're kind of on the front end of a lot of these vehicle-to-grid interactions across the country, not just in California. So think about the customer, think about the bus, think about the utility provider, right? Jeni providing the electrons. We also, as part of some of our rebate programs, help to pay for some of the infrastructure. So the cost of actually putting the chargers in the ground. They also got state money from CEC and other grant funding that allowed them, one, to help pay for the buses, but also the infrastructure.
Right.
So Nuvi is sort of that, I would call them the brains of the operation. So most customers, their business isn't energy. They don't know it. So they need a very smart technical kind of software program or partner that allows them to charge and discharge at the opportune times. And that is what Nuvi is doing in this pilot. We are providing the infrastructure. We're providing sort of that service. But the data and the learning is going to be the customer behavior along with what Nuvi and the data that we find along with that. So it's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's very, it is wonderful. You may be aware of this. We are coming to San Diego next week. This time, where are we? Yes, this time next week I'll be in San Diego. Oh my God! Which I'm very much looking forward to. So yeah, we're running our show there.
I will be there. I look forward to it.
No, it's going to be. We're very excited. I'm always the one who's most anxious about it. When we first started doing them here, I said, "No one's going to come. It's the most stupid idea ever. This is a YouTube channel. What on earth are we doing live shows?" And on the morning of the first day, when we ever did a live show, there were just over 5,000 people waiting outside the door. And Dan, my partner who runs the company, said, "I don't think you need to worry."
No need to worry.
We know that there's a lot of people coming to San Diego. We're very excited about it. So there are people coming to San Diego. I now accept that there are people coming.
Yes, good. And it's such a timely topic, and I really appreciate you coming to San Diego and having this conversation. I know, San Diego Gas and Electric, we want to talk about the things that we're doing, but like I said, we're not going to get there alone. Partnerships and bringing everyone together and having these information sessions and learning, that is how we're going to get through this energy transition together. Yeah. And the more we appreciate that, the better we'll be.
Yeah, but it is a global thing. I mean, that's the really exciting thing about it. Is it's not restricted to one city, one country, one state. It is very, very global. We're living.
And the electric grid is all connected, right?
Yeah.
We're all connected, so we should all be together because it's like our lines and our pipes and wires don't stop in San Diego. They continue up to California and out to New York. And what's happening in New York absolutely impacts what happens in California. Yeah. And globally, the way that we, go after GHG emissions and clean our fuel sources, benefits the world.
Yeah. I mean, what's exciting for you, I would imagine, as a company is the prospect, the possibilities of like the next step after you've done all your school buses. They're all electric. But then there's going to be trucking companies and delivery companies with lots of vans and delivery, all that stuff. I mean, I know some of that is happening in this country where there are quite large companies running fleets of electric vans that have worked out that bidirectional charging in those vans is extreme. It makes economic sense. When you realize they're not doing it to be green, they're doing it because it saves them a lot of money. And and the technology is more efficient. That side of it is going to be very exciting. I mean, I would imagine this is, for you, the very first step into this area that could have a really big impact on your business.
Yeah, I think so. We've had a lot of different steps, but this is the biggest step we've had in this area. We also have a program called Power Your Drive for Fleets, and so we've been working with our business community for the last couple of years, helping them, incentivizing them really to install chargers, not always bi-directional chargers. So sometimes it's just helping them get fuel to sort of reduce the GHG emissions. In San Diego, 50% of our GHG emissions is attributed to transportation.
Yeah.
So, getting that out of the air is really important. I think now when you add the bi-directional capacity, again, we still haven't it, and I'm just being sincere, we haven't 100% figured out how to incentivize customers. Now we have an emergency load program that El Cajon Valley is a part of. So in emergencies, they can get compensated, but we've got to figure out the customer behavior and the commodity and that cost differential for it to really explode and to see all corporate organizations kind of really lean into the bi-directional. Right now, some of our biggest companies aren't doing bi-directional, but they're peak shaving. So they're using their batteries, like we said before, to put back onto their building. And in our state, we have demand rates, and so you want to cut those demand rates to save money. So there's a lot of different ways to play it. I think the more we do this, the more we'll learn how to optimize that behavior. And I think that's why this pilot is so unique. Is it's going to give us a lot of chances to play around and see what works.
Yeah. No, fantastic, Jeni. Thank you so much for talking to me. It's been really fascinating. I think, well, I can't wait to see it. I'm so frustrated. I'm not in San Diego long enough to come and come and have a look at a school bus charging or discharging. But I was just going
to say we have to set up a time for you to get to see the school buses. But I know that's not for me to do. But that would be fun.
No, well, we will cover it because I just think it's a really important aspect, and I just can't wait for something along those lines to start happening here. It was slightly different. We've got a different setup in this country, so it's not quite the same. But it just is. I always find it. There's plenty of bad news in the world. We don't need to add to that. And when I see something like this, I think I'd never thought of it. It makes so much sense. Immediately you see it, you go, oh yeah, school buses. They're not used at night. They're not used in the middle of the day. They're just, they're the perfect first thing to do. It was really good news to know that that's happening.
Well, and I want to say I appreciate just your opportunity to kind of shine a light in this area because again, I think everyone can get here, and I think this is part of the future. So the more we can share and learn from each other, the better.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week.
Sounds good.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed that. It was amazing talking to Jeni. I can't wait to be there. By the time some of you hear this, I will have been there. I'll have come back home. But we're very excited about what's going on in California, and we can't wait to see it all. Please do tell your friends about this podcast. That's really, and family, your uncle, your funny uncle who's going, I don't think them electric cars are going to work. You may not have an uncle that speaks like that. I know I did. But that was a long time ago. Please subscribe to this show, and that's it, really. Have a look. All the links to all the things we talked about are in the show notes beneath. I don't know where the show notes are. They may be above or below, whatever system you use to consume this content. None of those words I like when you listen to this show. Anyway, I'll shut up. What am I waffling on about? Very few people are going to hear this. I'm not going to worry about it too much. If you have been, thank you for watching, listening, doing whatever you did.